The morning bell at Westbrook High rang out like a command, and the hallways obeyed. Doors burst open, voices spilled into the corridors, and the space filled with the din of teenage life. Sneakers squeaked across the floor. Lockers slammed with metallic thuds. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, pencil shavings, and the syrupy sweetness of vending machine candy bars. It was the kind of chaos only a high school could hold. In the middle of it all walked Amara, her arms strained under the weight of 3 textbooks, a worn binder, and a spiral notebook filled with careful handwriting. Her movements were precise, as if she'd practiced them. Shoulders tucked inward, steps small, eyes lowered toward the floor. She wanted to move unseen, like water slipping through cracks. But there was no hiding what made her different. When Amara spoke, whether to ask a question in class or to murmur, "Excuse me," as she slipped through the hall, her voice carried something foreign to Westbrook's halls. An accent, soft, melodic, touched with a music not found in the flat vowels of Midwestern English. It wrapped around each syllable like a ribbon, delicate and undeniable. Some students found it charming. A few teachers leaned in closer when she spoke, listening with patient smiles. But others heard it like an alarm bell announcing she did not belong. And for 3 girls who ruled the junior class with a mixture of charm and cruelty, that accent was blood in the water. They waited by the lockers near the science wing. Kelsey, Morgan, and Taylor. They weren't athletes, not all of them. They weren't scholars, not by a long shot, but they had cultivated something just as powerful: control. They decided who sat at what lunch table, who got invited to whose birthday party, who mattered and who didn't. Their power was invisible, yet it shaped every corner of student life. This morning their target was Amara. Kelsey spotted her first, tilting her head with a grin that could slice paper. "Oh my God, here she comes," she said, loud enough for her friends but soft enough that Amara couldn't pretend not to hear. "Did you hear her in math yesterday?" "Excuse me, may I borrow your pencil?" Morgan nearly doubled over with laughter, clutching the strap of her glittering backpack. "I almost died. She sounds like she's acting in some weird movie. Like, not even a good one." Taylor crossed her arms, her nails clicking against her phone case. "She's such a freak. Watch this." The 3 shifted subtly, arranging themselves so Amara would have to pass directly in front of them. The crowd in the hallway thinned for just a moment, leaving her exposed, like prey stepping into open ground. Amara felt it immediately. The shift in the air, the way eyes began to track her, waiting for a show. She hugged her books tighter to her chest, trying to quicken her steps. But there they were, 3 smiling wolves in designer sneakers. "Hey, Amara," Kelsey called. Her voice carried down the hallway. "Say something for us. Go on, just anything." Amara froze for half a heartbeat. She hadn't expected to be cornered so early in the day. Her gaze flicked from Kelsey to Morgan to Taylor, then down at the safety of the floor. "Excuse me?" she whispered. Morgan clapped her hands together, delighted. "Oh my gosh, that's it. Did you hear it? Excuse me." She repeated the phrase in an exaggerated sing-song, drawing out every vowel until the hallway around them burst with laughter. Taylor leaned forward, eyes glinting. "Careful, don't let her cast a spell on you. Sounds like she's speaking in code." The laughter rolled outward like ripples in water. A few students joined in, eager to align themselves with the powerful trio. Others avoided Amara's eyes, shame flickering across their faces as they looked away. Heat rushed into Amara's cheeks. Her ears burned. Her heart slammed against her ribs so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, but the words lodged like stones in her throat. She remembered her father's advice, whispered late at night in their small apartment. "Stay calm, Amara. Always stay calm. They don't see you yet. One day they will." Kelsey leaned closer, mimicking again with an exaggerated bow. "Excuse me. May I sit here?" Morgan squealed, clutching her friend's arm. "Stop. You sound just like her." The laughter stabbed at Amara's skin, sharp as glass. She pressed her lips together, determined to slip past them without a word. But as she tried, Morgan shifted her foot into her path. Her books flew. The impact was small, her shin against Morgan's sneaker, but the effect was devastating. The textbooks tumbled from her arms, papers burst into the air like startled birds, pens clattered against lockers and rolled into the crowd. The sound was loud enough to hush the hallway for a moment before the laughter came back, doubled and merciless. "Oh no," Taylor crooned, her tone syrupy and cruel. "Did the little foreigner drop her homework?" Amara dropped to her knees, hands trembling as she scrambled to collect her papers. Her notes, covered in neat handwriting, slid across the tile. A few students bent as if to help her, then thought better of it and stepped away. Their eyes were wide, but none of them intervened. Her throat ached with humiliation, but her eyes stayed dry. She would not cry, not here, not for them. The laughter echoed around her, bouncing from wall to wall. Above her, Kelsey smirked, victorious. Morgan whispered something to Taylor, and the two of them erupted into another round of giggles. Amara stacked her books against her chest once more, every muscle in her body taut with the effort not to break. She rose to her feet slowly, deliberately, her chin still tilted downward. The bullies thought they had won, but what they didn't know was that this moment, this cruel display, this staged humiliation, was only temporary. The silence they mistook for weakness was nothing more than the gathering of a storm. Because in just 15 minutes, the girl they mocked would stand before the class. She would speak not in one tongue, but in three. And when she finished, the same voices that laughed at her accent would be silent in awe. And not one of them, not Kelsey, not Morgan, not Taylor, would ever laugh at her again. The humiliation of the hallway lingered in Amara's chest like smoke. But humiliation was not new to her. It was a ghost that had followed her across continents, whispering in her ear whenever she dared to speak in a way that marked her as different. To understand Amara's silence that morning, to understand why she lowered her gaze rather than lash out, you would have to trace her story back to where it began. Her first words were spoken under the blazing sun of Accra, Ghana, where streets pulsed with rhythm and life. Vendors filled the markets with cries of greeting and bargaining. The scent of fried plantains and groundnut stew floated through the air. Children played football with makeshift balls of rags tied together, their laughter filling narrow alleyways. In that world, Amara's voice was never mocked. Her first language, Twi, rolled from her tongue like water flowing down a stream. She learned the cadences from her grandmother, who told stories of ancestors beneath the mango tree at dusk. "Our word," her grandmother would say, "are not just words. They are drums. They carry the heartbeat of our people." Even as a little girl, Amara loved the feel of language in her mouth, the way one word could hold entire histories. She listened closely as her father read to her in English, insisting she practice the second language he taught at the university. "The world will demand it of you," he said gently, "but it must never erase what came before." Her mother, a nurse at the community clinic, would return home tired but smiling, and Amara learned compassion in the way her mother's voice softened when she spoke to patients. It was a household where language was not just communication, but a bridge between hearts. But life does not remain still. When Amara was 10, her father received an offer, a teaching position at a university in Lyon, France. It was an opportunity that promised security, new horizons, and a better future. And so, with heavy goodbyes, the family packed their lives into suitcases and boarded a plane. France was dazzling and frightening. The air was colder, the streets wider, the sounds unfamiliar. Amara found herself surrounded by children who spoke words that seemed to fly faster than she could grasp. For months she sat in classrooms silent, trying to piece together the music of French. At recess, children laughed at her hesitations. "Elle ne comprend rien," they whispered. "She doesn't understand anything." The sting was sharp, but something inside her refused to break. Every night she studied beside her father, who corrected her gently. She practiced with her mother at the market, repeating the words for bread, milk, apples. Slowly, syllable by syllable, the language opened itself to her. By 12, she was not only fluent but elegant. Her teachers marveled at her essays. Her classmates began asking her for help with conjugations. And the same children who once whispered, "She doesn't understand," now stared in awe when she recited entire passages of Molière by memory. It was in France that Amara learned her second lesson about language, that mastery was its own form of power. Yet power could not shield her family from life's storms. After 6 years, her father was offered another position, this time across an ocean in America. The decision was made with careful thought. You children deserve opportunity, her mother explained. And this country, for all its flaws, is a place where doors can open. So once again, they packed their belongings, folded memories into boxes, and set off. America was different still. The accent was sharp, the words clipped and fast. Where French flowed like wine and Twee danced like drums, English in America struck like hammer blows. At school, Amara spoke softly, unsure of how her voice would sound in this new world. Her classmates noticed immediately. "Where are you from?" they asked, sometimes curious, sometimes mocking. When she answered, their eyebrows lifted. When she stumbled over idioms, they laughed. A group of girls once imitated her for an entire lunch period, giggling each time they exaggerated the lilting curve of her vowels. She learned quickly that silence was safer, but silence did not mean emptiness. In her small bedroom, she filled notebooks with words, copying English phrases until they felt familiar. Her neighbor, Senora Alvarez, invited her over for tea and began teaching her Spanish. Another bridge, another world. Amara accepted eagerly, fascinated by the similarities and differences, the ways Spanish curved in her mouth differently than French or Twi. By 16, she held three languages like jewels in her hands: Twi, French, and Spanish. And of course, English. Spoken with an accent, yes, but spoken with precision and depth. She was a girl carrying three worlds in her voice. But at Westbrook High, none of that mattered. To most of her classmates, she was just the new girl with the accent. They did not see the market stalls of Accra in her cadence, the French libraries in her precision, the neighborly kindness of Spanish in her warmth. They only heard what was different, and different in high school was dangerous. Still, Amara endured. She kept her head down, her voice soft, her essays immaculate. She believed that perhaps if she remained quiet long enough, she could pass unnoticed. But destiny has a way of catching up to those who try to hide from it. Her father's words often echoed in her mind. They may not understand you now, but one day your voice will show them who you are. She clung to those words on mornings when laughter followed her down the hall, when cafeteria tables turned away, when group projects ended with her ideas dismissed. And on that morning, when her books spilled across the floor and her accent became the punchline of cruel jokes, she felt those words return. They burned like embers in her chest, fragile yet fierce. Her silence would not last forever. In 15 minutes, she would be asked to stand before her class, to speak, to reveal herself. And though the bullies did not know it yet, though they smirked and whispered in the corner of the room, the girl they mocked was carrying more than humiliation in her heart. She carried the rhythm of Ghana, the elegance of France, the warmth of Spain, and the quiet resolve of her own unshakable will. What they saw as weakness was, in truth, her greatest strength, and very soon they would see it unveiled. The hallway incident was not the first time Amar had been mocked, and it would not be the last. In the strange social theater of high school, cruelty tended to multiply when left unchecked. Where one insult was ignored, another would follow. And where laughter was rewarded, it quickly became the language of power. Over the next weeks, Amara discovered that silence, though it kept her dignity intact, did not always protect her from escalation. It began in the cafeteria. Westbrook's cafeteria was a cavernous room filled with the clatter of trays and the sharp scent of ketchup and pizza. Students clustered in tribes, athletes at one table, theater kids at another, the ever-present hum of gossip floating above it all. Amara carried her tray carefully, her eyes scanning for an empty seat. She was used to eating alone, though part of her still hoped for a small miracle, that someone might waver over, smile, and make room. She spotted an open spot at the corner of a table half filled with students. Gathering her courage, she approached. "Excuse me," she said softly, her voice laced with that familiar lilt. "May I sit here?" The words were polite, practiced, but as soon as they left her lips, she knew. The students exchanged looks, and smirks spread like wildfire. From behind her came the unmistakable giggle of Kelsey. "Oh my God," she actually said it again. Excuse me. May I sit here? The table erupted into laughter. One boy waved his hand dramatically, parroting her words in a clumsy imitation. Amara felt the heat in her cheeks rise once more, her stomach twisting. She set her tray down quietly, only for Taylor to slide her water bottle into the empty seat. Sorry, Taylor said with false sweetness. This seat's taken. Amara hesitated, standing there for a long moment with her tray in hand, the laughter pressing against her from all sides. Then she lifted it again, turned away, and found an empty corner near the vending machines, alone again. She ate silently, staring at the clock, willing the minutes to pass. The next strike came in class. In biology, the teacher assigned a group project on ecosystems. Amara was paired with 3 other students, 2 boys and a girl, none of whom seemed pleased by the arrangement. When she suggested dividing tasks evenly, her accent made the words roll differently, and the boys snickered. Yeah, sure, one of them muttered. Why don't you write it in your fancy language? They spent most of the period ignoring her, scrolling through their phones, whispering to each other. When the project was due, Amara had done nearly all the work herself, her careful diagrams and typed paragraphs handed in without complaint. But when the teacher returned the grade, an A, her group claimed credit with pride. We worked really hard, they said. No one questioned them. No one defended her. And then there were the teachers. Some noticed, of course. They saw the whispers, the laughter, the subtle cruelties. But high school classrooms were battlegrounds of their own, and many teachers chose not to fight every war. When Amara's papers were scattered across the hallway, one teacher looked on, shaking his head but saying nothing. In gym class, when the last student deliberately refused to partner with her, the teacher sighed and paired her with a disinterested substitute. Each small silence deepened the loneliness. Amara carried it home with her, though she tried not to show it. Her father asked gently, "How was school today?" And she answered, "It was fine." Her mother kissed her forehead and said, "Eat, you'll feel better." And she obeyed. Her younger brother, still too young to notice the complexities of cruelty, laughed and asked her to help with homework. And she did, smiling, though her chest ached. But silence is never the full truth. Inside, she began to question herself. Was her accent truly so unbearable? Did her voice mark her forever as an outsider? Was it better, perhaps, to say nothing at all? At night, she would stare at her notebooks, flipping through pages of French poetry, Spanish vocabulary lists, English essays. She wondered how something that had once felt like power, her ability to hold 3 languages inside her, could now feel like a chain dragging her down. Still, there was something unbroken in her, a flicker that would not be extinguished. She heard her grandmother's voice in memory, telling stories in Twi beneath the mango tree. She remembered the applause of her French classmates when she recited Molière. She recalled Senora Alvarez smiling with pride when Amara mastered a Spanish proverb. These voices whispered to her in the quiet hours. Your words are not shame. They are bridges. They are strength. And so, even as the cruelty escalated, even as she sat alone in the cafeteria and bore the weight of unjust group projects, Amara endured. But endurance has a limit. By the time winter crept into Westbrook and the first snow dusted the football field, the bullying had grown sharper. Notes left in her locker scribbled with mock phonetics of her accent. Giggles whenever she raised her hand. Even applause. Cruel, sarcastic applause when she mispronounced an English idiom. It was during one of those bleak days as she gathered her things after class that Ms. Reynolds, her English teacher, called out. Don't forget, everyone, Ms. Reynolds announced cheerfully. Next week we'll be giving short heritage presentations. 2 minutes, no notes, just you, sharing where you come from. Amara froze. Her heart raced. The word heritage echoed in her ears. 2 minutes, no notes. She imagined standing before the class, every eye fixed on her, every smirk waiting for her accent to slip. The bullies looked delighted. Taylor turned, her grin wide. This is gonna be good, she whispered. Kelsey leaned back in her chair. Oh, I can't wait. Maybe she'll give us a whole performance in, what's it called? Africa East? Morgan giggled, adding, or maybe she'll just say, excuse me for 2 minutes straight. The 3 laughed until Ms. Reynolds hushed them, but Amara's heart was already pounding. That night, she sat at her desk staring at a blank page. The fear pressed heavy on her shoulders. How could she tell her story without giving them more ammunition? How could she speak when every word risked mockery? And yet, as she sat there, a thought stirred within her. Perhaps this was not a curse. Perhaps this was her chance. She whispered aloud, almost testing the idea. 15 minutes, she said softly to herself. That's all I need. 15 minutes to prepare. 15 minutes to turn years of silence into strength. For the first time in weeks, her lips curved into a faint smile. That night, after the announcement of the heritage presentations, Amara returned home with her chest still tight. The winter air outside bit at her cheeks, the sky already dark, though the evening was young. Snow dusted the neighborhood rooftops, muffling the world in a quiet stillness. Her family's apartment was small but warm. Inside, the aroma of stew simmering on the stove greeted her, mingling with the faint hum of a radio playing high-life music from Ghana. Her mother moved gracefully in the kitchen, stirring the pot, her apron tied loosely around her waist. Her younger brother sat cross-legged on the floor, crayons spread before him, his small fingers clumsy but determined as he tried to draw a lion. Her father sat at the dining table, papers spread before him, essays from his students at the university, his glasses perched on the end of his nose, and every so often he scribbled notes in the margins with the patience of a man who believed in teaching through guidance rather than reprimand. Amara stood in the doorway, watching them for a moment. This was her sanctuary, the smells, the sounds, the warmth of voices that carried no judgment. Here, her accent was not strange. It was simply her. Her father glanced up, eyes softening when he saw her. "Welcome home, Mama," he said, using the shortened nickname he favored. "How was school?" The question always carried weight, though he asked it casually. And, as always, she gave the practiced answer. "It was fine." Her mother turned from the stove, frowning slightly. "Fine?" she repeated. "You are too quiet. Sit, eat. You cannot carry the whole world in silence." Amara obeyed, slipping her books onto the counter and taking a seat at the table. Her father set down his pen and studied her carefully. "Something is troubling you," he said gently. She hesitated. How could she explain? How could she tell them about the laughter, the mocking voices, the way her accent had become a weapon in the mouths of cruel classmates? Her silence stretched long enough that her father sighed. "I know that look," he said. "It is the look you had when you first came to France. You remember? You wanted to speak, but the words felt too heavy." Amara's lips parted, then closed again. She lowered her gaze. Her father leaned forward. "Do you remember what I told you then?" She nodded slowly. His words were etched in her memory like carvings on stone. "They may not understand you, but your voice carries the strength of three worlds." Her mother sat beside her now, wiping her hands on her apron. She placed a palm over Amara's. "Your accent is not a weakness," she said firmly. "It is the sound of where you have been. It is the proof that you belong to more than one place. That is not something to hide, Amma. That is something to hold proudly." The warmth of her mother's hand steadied her, but doubt still lingered. "They don't see it that way," she whispered. "Of course not," her father said calmly. "Children mock what they do not understand. Adults do it too, though with more subtlety. But ignorance cannot erase truth. And the truth, Amma, is that your voice is a bridge." She thought of that word, bridge, a connection, a passage, something that joined one side to another. Perhaps her father was right. Perhaps her accent was not a wall, but a span across cultures. Later in her room, Amara sat at her small desk and opened her notebook. The blank page stared back at her, daring her to begin. She picked up her pen, but her hand trembled. She set it down again, pressing her palms flat against the paper as if to draw courage from it. Memories rose unbidden, carrying her backward through time. She was 6 years old again, sitting beneath the mango tree in her grandmother's yard in Accra. The air smelled of ripe fruit and red earth. Her grandmother's voice wove stories in Twi, each tale layered with rhythm and song. Amara had repeated the words after her, stumbling at first, then laughing as she mastered them. Her grandmother's wrinkled hands had clapped in delight. "See? You carry our ancestors in your tongue." The memory shifted. She was 11, sitting at a desk in a French classroom, surrounded by children who spoke a language that once felt impossible. Her cheeks burned with shame when they laughed at her mistakes, but she pressed on, night after night, until she could stand in front of the class and recite poetry. When she finished, the same children who mocked her had stared in astonishment, their applause filling the room. And then, years later, sitting with Senora Alvarez in a sunlit kitchen in America, sipping tea sweetened with honey as her neighbor taught her Spanish words. Language, Senora Alvarez had said, is not just grammar, it is family. It is food, music, prayer. Each word is a gift. Take them. Use them. Amara smiled faintly at the memory. 3 languages, 3 gifts. She picked up her pen again. This time it did not tremble. She began to write, first in English, then slipping into French, then Spanish, the words flowing into one another. Her notebook became a tapestry of languages, her story stitched together from every place she had been. Her brother poked his head into her room at one point, holding up his drawing of a lion. "Look, Amma, I made it for you." She took it with a smile, her heart warming at the sight. "It's beautiful," she told him, and he beamed before darting away again. When she was alone once more, she whispered the opening of her speech aloud. The sound filled her small room, timid at first, then growing stronger. She imagined standing before her classmates, imagined their laughter waiting like knives. But she also imagined something else, their silence, their awe, the moment when they would finally see her, not as a joke, but as a girl carrying 3 worlds. For the first time, she did not fear the heritage presentation. She longed for it, because this time, silence would not be her shield. Her voice would be. The morning of the heritage presentations dawned cold and gray. A thin veil of frost clung to the windows of Westbrook High, and students stamped their feet and blew into their hands as they shuffled through the front doors. Inside, the air buzzed with anticipation. It wasn't often that English class promised entertainment, but today felt different. Rumors had already spread. Everyone knew Amara would have to speak, and for many the thought of hearing her accent stretched across an entire speech was irresistible. Some were merely curious. Others, crueler, looked forward to laughing. In the back row of Ms. Reynolds' classroom, Kelsey leaned against her desk, whispering to Morgan and Taylor. "This is going to be epic," she said, her eyes glinting. "She'll probably stumble through the first sentence. I bet she doesn't even make it to the end." Morgan grinned, her voice dripping with anticipation. 2 whole minutes of "excuse me." "I can't wait." Taylor, ever the instigator, pulled out her phone and held it low beneath her desk. "Should I record it? Imagine the views." Their laughter was soft enough to avoid a teacher's attention, but loud enough for Amara to hear. She sat 2 rows ahead, her notebook clutched in her lap, her stomach twisting. She heard every word, every stifled giggle. Her fingers tightened around the paper until the edges crumpled. Her heart thudded painfully, each beat a reminder of how exposed she would soon be. She could already feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to fail. Ms. Reynolds, cheerful as always, stood at the front of the room. "All right, everyone. Today's presentations are not about grades. They're about stories. They're about sharing who you are, where you come from, and what makes your family unique. Remember, 2 minutes, no notes, just you. Be proud." She glanced around the room, her eyes lingering for a moment on Amara. There was kindness in her gaze, though it did little to calm the storm building in Amara's chest. One by one, students began to present. Jason went first, swaggering to the front with a grin. He spoke about his Italian grandparents, who made pasta from scratch every Sunday. He ended with a joke about garlic bread, and the class laughed warmly. Then came Emily, who shared a story about her Irish heritage, complete with a clumsy attempt at a jig that drew applause. Another student described his German ancestors and their tradition of woodworking. Another spoke about Chinese New Year, holding up a red envelope as a prop. Each story was met with polite interest, scattered laughter, applause. And with each passing moment, Amara's turn crept closer. Her palms grew damp. She pressed them against her jeans, trying to dry them, but the sweat returned almost immediately. Her throat felt tight, as though invisible hands were squeezing it shut. She whispered to herself, barely audible, You can do this. You've done this before. Just breathe. But in her mind, she saw the hallway again. Books flying, papers scattering, laughter echoing. She heard the cafeteria taunts, the cruel imitations, the sarcastic applause. She saw Taylor's phone raised discreetly, ready to capture every stumble. The fear pressed down hard, and for a fleeting moment she considered raising her hand, telling Ms. Reynolds she couldn't do it, that she was sick, that she needed to be excused. But then another memory surfaced. Her grandmother beneath the mango tree, her voice strong as she said, "Our words are drums. They carry the heartbeat of our people." And then her father's calm voice in France guiding her through conjugations when she wanted to give up. Mastery is its own form of power. And finally, Senor Alvarez in her sunlit kitchen, each word is a gift. Take them. Use them. Amara closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, and straightened her back. Her turn was coming. Next up, Miss Reynolds announced, scanning her list. Amara. The room fell silent. Even the students who hadn't paid much attention sat up straighter, curious. The bullies grinned, bracing for what they assumed would be a disaster. Amara rose slowly from her chair. Her knees felt unsteady, her hands still trembled, but her steps toward the front of the room were steady. Each one echoed louder in her ears than the last. She reached the front, turned to face her classmates, and for a moment simply stood there clutching her paper. The silence stretched. She could feel the weight of their stares pressing against her, some expectant, some mocking, some indifferent. Her gaze flicked briefly toward the back row where Kelsey smirked openly. Morgan covered her mouth to hide her laughter, and Taylor angled her phone just so. Amara inhaled deeply, and then she spoke. "My name is Amara," she began, her voice quiet but clear. "My family comes from Ghana, and this is our story." A few stifled snickers rose from the back, but she ignored them. She continued, her accent wrapping around each word, not as a burden, but as a melody. "In Ghana, I learned my first language, Twi. It is not just words. It is rhythm. It is song. It is history." Her voice grew stronger, steadier. "Later, my family moved to France. There I learned French, the language of poets, of scholars, of thinkers. And when we came here, to America, I carried those voices with me. My father's, my grandmother's, my mother's. Each word is part of who I am." The room shifted. The laughter quieted. Even Miss Reynolds leaned forward slightly, her expression intent. Amara paused, her eyes scanning the room. For the first time, she did not lower her gaze. She met their stares head-on, her chin lifted. She knew what came next, the part that would silence them. She could almost feel the clock ticking down, each second leading her closer to the moment she would reveal the fullness of her voice. 15 minutes ago, she had been mocked in whispers. Now the stage was hers, and in 3 languages, she was about to show them exactly who she was. The classroom was silent, not the ordinary silence of disinterest, but a taut, electric quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm, when the air grows heavy and expectant. Amara stood at the front, her hands clutching the edges of her notebook, though she wasn't allowed to read from it. She could feel her pulse hammering in her throat, but she forced herself to lift her chin. "My name is Amara," she said again, her voice steadier this time. "My family comes from Ghana, and this is our story." A smirk tugged at Kelsey's mouth. Morgan leaned forward, whispering something behind her palm. Taylor's phone remained angled low, its camera lens glinting faintly. Amara saw all of it, the smirks, the whispers, the readiness to catch her stumble, and for a heartbeat, fear threatened to overwhelm her. But then she remembered her grandmother's words beneath the mango tree. "Our words are drums. They carry the heartbeat of our people." She inhaled deeply, and then she let the first drum beat fall. "In Ghana," she began, her accent lacing the words with melody, "I learned my first language, Twi. It is not just a language. It is music. It is rhythm. It is the sound of our ancestors." And then, without hesitation, she shifted into Twi. Her voice grew firmer as the words rolled smoothly from her tongue. Greetings, proverbs, fragments of stories her grandmother once told. The sounds filled the room, unfamiliar yet commanding. Students blinked in surprise, glancing at one another. The mocking smiles faltered. Even those who didn't understand felt the strength in her tone. When she paused, she did not shrink back into English immediately. She let the silence linger, let the weight of the words settle. Then she continued, her voice warm and deliberate. Later, my family moved to France. There I learned a second voice, French, the language of poets, of scholars, of dreamers. And just as smoothly, she switched tongues. Her words flowed in French, elegant and precise. She spoke of libraries where she had buried herself in books, of evenings spent practicing conjugations, of learning not only to speak, but to dream in French. J'ai appris à voir le monde autrement, she said clearly. I learned to see the world differently. Several students shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. A few who had studied French in their own classes recognized fragments and sat up straighter, their eyes widening. The room that had been braced for laughter was now hushed with awe. Amara did not stop. Her heart was racing, but with every word her fear shrank. Her voice, once so quiet, filled the room with power. And here in America, she said, slipping back into English for a moment, I found another bridge. A neighbor who welcomed me, who taught me her language, her songs, her stories. And through her, I learned Spanish. She turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the room, and then she spoke in Spanish. Her words carried warmth and cadence, rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. El lenguaje no es solo gramática, she said. Es familia, es música, es amor. Language is not just grammar, it is family. It is music, it is love. The shift was stunning. Even students who had been ready to laugh sat still, transfixed. Some mouths hung open slightly. A boy in the front row whispered, "She speaks 3 languages," as though saying it aloud made it more unbelievable. Amara's voice did not waver. For the first time in months, she felt no shame in the way her accent curved around words. Instead, she felt its strength, its proof of everything she carried inside her. She ended in English, her tone firm and unyielding. My accent is not a weakness. It is proof that I belong to 3 worlds. It is proof that I carry stories from Ghana, from France, from Spain. It is proof that I am more than what you hear when I say, excuse me. She let her gaze travel deliberately to the back row, to the 3 girls who had mocked her the loudest. Their smirks were gone. Kelsey's jaw hung slightly open. Morgan stared wide-eyed. And Taylor's phone was lowered slowly, almost guiltily. Amara's voice softened, but it carried more power than ever. No one, she said, can take that from me. Silence. A silence so complete it seemed the air itself had been stripped of sound. The classroom, which moments before had been primed for laughter, sat utterly still. Every face was turned toward her, but not with ridicule, with something closer to awe. And then a sound broke it. Clap. It came from the front row, a hesitant beginning. A boy who had been watching closely set his hands together again. Clap, clap. And then another joined, and another. Within seconds, the classroom erupted in applause. Not polite clapping, not the empty gesture they gave to every presentation. This was real, thunderous, rising like a wave. Hands smacked together, voices murmured in astonishment. She speaks 3 languages, someone whispered again. That was amazing, another breathed. Amara stood still, the sound washing over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. She felt something inside her unclench, the knot of fear and humiliation that had lived in her chest since arriving at Westbrook. For the first time, she no longer felt invisible. She no longer felt mocked. She felt seen. Ms. Reynolds blinked quickly, her eyes glistening as she smiled. Thank you, Amara, she said softly. That was extraordinary. The applause finally faded, though the awe remained. Students turned to one another, whispering, not with ridicule, but with respect. And in the back row, the bullies sat in stunned silence. Kelsey's smirk was gone, replaced by a tight frown. Morgan fiddled nervously with her sleeve. Taylor's phone was tucked hastily back into her bag. For once, they had no words. Amara returned to her seat, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. She sat down quietly, her cheeks flushed not with shame but with pride. Her hands still trembled, but this time it was from the rush of victory. For 15 minutes, she had carried the weight of humiliation, and in 2 minutes, she had shattered it completely. The girl they mocked for her accent had silenced them, not in anger, but in 3 languages, each a testament to her strength. The applause that followed Amara's speech lingered long after she sat back down, echoing in the ears of every student in the room. It had not been polite clapping, nor the forced kind that teachers sometimes coaxed from an unwilling class. It had been genuine, rising from surprise, admiration, and something deeper, respect. For weeks, Amara had been invisible or worse, the punchline of a cruel joke. But in those 2 minutes, she had transformed before their eyes. No one had expected her to hold such power, and now no one could forget it. The effect was immediate. Students turned in their seats, whispering to one another, their eyes flicking toward her with something new in them: curiosity, awe, even a touch of envy. For the first time, the weight of ridicule that had clung to her seemed to dissipate, replaced by a halo of dignity. But not everyone welcomed this change. In the back row, Kelsey's hands clenched into fists beneath her desk. Morgan stared blankly at the floor, her cheeks flushed pink. Taylor shifted in her seat, biting her lip as she shoved her phone deeper into her bag. Their power had always been built on perception. They were untouchable because others believed them to be. Their sneers and laughter carried weight only because their classmates followed their lead. But now that illusion had cracked. When the next student stood to present, the applause was polite but subdued. The energy of the room had changed, and for once it wasn't the trio in the back row dictating it. At lunch, the shift became even more obvious. Amara carried her tray into the cafeteria, as she had done countless times before, bracing herself for the usual isolation. But instead of cold shoulders and mocking glances, she felt eyes following her in a different way. 2 girls at a nearby table smiled tentatively and moved their bags to make room. A boy she barely knew lifted his chin in greeting. Even the whispers that trailed her seemed different, not sharp-edged with ridicule, but hushed with wonder. "She speaks 3 languages," someone murmured. "Did you hear her? She sounded like a professor or something." Amara sat carefully, uncertain, but her heart lifted. For the first time, she did not eat alone. Meanwhile, Kelsey, Morgan, and Taylor sat at their usual table. But something had changed. The laughter around them was forced, their jokes falling flat. When Kelsey tried to imitate Amara's accent once more, rolling her eyes dramatically, the response was tepid at best. A girl at the table frowned and muttered, "It's not funny." Kelsey froze, stunned by the challenge. For the first time, someone had openly contradicted her. "Yeah," another student added hesitantly, "she was actually kind of amazing." The 3 bullies exchanged uneasy glances. Their empire, built on fear and mockery, was crumbling. Not with a dramatic confrontation, but with quiet withdrawal. Their peers no longer laughed with them, and without laughter, their cruelty lost its teeth. By the end of the week, the shift was undeniable. In English, when Taylor tried to whisper another joke under her breath, Ms. Reynolds fixed her with a firm stare. "Taylor," she said pointedly, "if you can't contribute respectfully, you'll stay after class." Taylor flushed and ducked her head, silenced. In biology, when Morgan snickered at the way Amara pronounced a word, another student turned and said, "Cut it out. At least she knows more than 1 language." Morgan's mouth snapped shut, and in the hallway when Kelsey muttered, "Excuse me," as Amara passed, expecting her usual chorus of laughter, she was met with blank stares. No one joined in. The trio was left exposed, their cruelty dangling awkwardly in the air. They had wielded mockery like a weapon, but now it backfired, slicing their own reputations instead. Even teachers began to take note. Ms. Reynolds praised Amara openly, not just for her presentation, but for her courage. "What you did," she told her after class one day, "was more than an assignment. You reminded everyone of what it means to have a voice." The words filled Amara with warmth, but also with humility. She had not set out to silence her bullies or to win admiration. She had simply told her story, and yet that story had shifted the balance of power in ways she never imagined. The bullies, once so untouchable, found themselves isolated. Their whispers no longer carried weight. Their laughter no longer commanded attention. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to shrink. Kelsey still walked the halls with her chin high, but her eyes darted more often, checking to see if anyone was following her lead. Morgan grew quieter, her bravado cracked. Taylor avoided eye contact, her phone tucked away more often than not. And Amara? Amara walked differently now. Not with arrogance, but with quiet confidence. Her shoulders were straighter, her steps more certain. She did not seek out attention, but she no longer shrank from it either. One afternoon, as she packed her books into her bag, a girl from her history class approached her hesitantly. Hey, could you help me with my French homework? She asked, her voice uncertain. You're like really good at it. Amara blinked in surprise, then smiled softly. Of course, she said. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. For the first time since arriving at Westbrook, she felt not like an outsider, but like someone whose presence mattered. The downfall of her bullies had not come with fireworks or dramatic confrontations. It had come with silence. The silence of classmates refusing to laugh, refusing to follow, refusing to let cruelty rule them. And in that silence, Amara's voice finally had room to be heard. The weeks that followed Amara's presentation unfolded like the slow unfurling of spring after a long, bitter winter. Nothing changed overnight. High school rarely transformed so quickly. But something in the air was undeniably different. The laughter that once followed her in hallways had grown quiet. The whispers were no longer cruel imitations of her accent, but murmurs of respect. Teachers, too, seemed to notice her more. They called on her not out of pity, but because they trusted she had something worth saying. Amara had not become suddenly popular. She did not crave that. But she no longer carried the weight of invisibility. She no longer walked with her shoulders hunched, no longer scanned rooms for the quickest exit. She walked with quiet dignity, and that was more than enough. At home, the change did not go unnoticed. One evening, as she sat at the kitchen table helping her younger brother with his spelling words, her father set down his mug of tea and studied her carefully. You are different, Amma, he said softly. She looked up in surprise. Different? Yes, he nodded, his eyes warm. You walk taller. You speak louder. You are no longer hiding your voice. Amara smiled faintly, glancing down at her brother's messy handwriting. They don't laugh as much anymore, she admitted. Her mother, stirring a pot on the stove, turned with a knowing look. Of course they don't. You showed them. You made them listen. You made them see. Her father leaned back, folding his arms. This is the way of the world, Amma. There will always be those who mock what they do not understand. But if you carry yourself with truth, with pride, even their laughter cannot stand forever. Truth will always silence ignorance. The words settled in her like a gentle weight, a reminder of the strength she had carried all along. But it wasn't only her family who noticed. At school, the trio who had tormented her most, Kelsey, Morgan, and Taylor, were shadows of their former selves. Their power had fractured, the cracks widening with every passing day. Kelsey still tried to command attention, but the sting in her words had dulled. Morgan, once so quick to laugh, now avoided Amara's gaze altogether. And Taylor, who had tried to capture Amara's humiliation on her phone, kept that device tucked away whenever Amara was near. One afternoon in the quiet of the library, Morgan approached Amara hesitantly. Her hands twisted the strap of her backpack, her eyes darting nervously. Hey, she said awkwardly, I just wanted to say, your presentation was really good. Amara blinked, surprised. She did not offer forgiveness. Not yet, not fully, but she nodded politely. Thank you, she said simply. Morgan seemed relieved, as though the small exchange had lifted some invisible weight. She slipped away quickly, leaving Amara with the faintest sense of victory. The bullies had not been transformed into friends, but they were no longer enemies either. Their cruelty had been disarmed, their power undone, and that was enough. One Friday afternoon, Ms. Reynolds pulled Amara aside after class. I want you to know, she said gently, that what you did changed the tone of this classroom. You gave us all a gift. You reminded us how powerful words can be, not just in one language, but in any language. Amara felt her throat tighten, Her eyes sting with unexpected tears. She whispered, "Thank you," and meant it with all her heart. That night she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the hum of the city outside her window. She thought about Ghana, the warmth of the markets, her grandmother's voice weaving stories. She thought about France, the libraries, the poetry, the thrill of mastering a new tongue. She thought about Spain, Senora Alvarez's kitchen, the soft patience of her neighbor's teaching. And she thought about America, the place where her accent had been mocked, and yet also the place where she had finally claimed her voice. Three worlds, three languages, one girl. Her accent was no longer a mark of shame. It was a badge of survival, a chorus of all the lives she had lived. And though high school was just one chapter in her story, she knew now that her voice would carry her through many more. Because an accent is not a flaw. It is a story. Every syllable carries history. Every word carries family. Every cadence carries the resilience of those who came before. Amara understood now what her grandmother had meant when she said that words are drums. They beat out the rhythm of identity, and once heard, they cannot be unheard. So when she walked through the halls of Westbrook the following Monday, she did so with her head high. Students who once smirked now offered small smiles. Teachers who once overlooked her now nodded with recognition. Even silence once suffocating now felt different. Not the silence of dismissal, but the silence of respect. The bullies still existed, of course. Cruelty never disappears entirely, but their reign had ended. They had been replaced not by a new hierarchy, but by something gentler, more equitable. A recognition that power does not always lie in volume or in mockery. Sometimes it lies in the quiet strength of a voice that refuses to break. And in Amira's case, that voice had spoken in three languages, each one a testament to her strength. In the years to come, she would look back on that day not as the end of her struggles, but as the beginning of something greater. It was the moment she chose not to remain silent, the moment she turned humiliation into triumph, the moment she proved that her voice, her accent, her heritage, her identity, was her greatest gift. And perhaps, without even realizing it, she had given that gift to everyone else in the room as well. Because from that day on, every time one of her classmates heard someone mocked for sounding different, they would remember Amara. They would remember the girl who silenced a classroom with the rhythm of three languages. And they would think twice before laughing.